So this is the latest release from horror icon Ari Aster, who previously did Hereditary and Midsummer. Um, Huge hits in the modern horror world. 2017 or 2018 is when Hereditary came out. Completely kind of changed the face of horror. He follows it up a year later with Midsummer, and then we don't hear from him for almost 4 years, 5 years, and we finally have Beau is Afraid, his follow up starring Joaquin Phoenix. In what I'm going to do my best to describe, because this movie is really challenging in a lot of ways. We meet
Yeah.
Beau in his therapist's office. He is going, he kind of has a dysfunctional relationship with his mother. He is in this therapy session and his mother is calling his like, the phone's on and it's like his mom and you can tell she's kind of this overbearing mother and he was supposed to go visit her this weekend, but of course things kind of go wrong. His keys get stolen. He can't get on the plane, can't get on the flight. And his mother's like, well, of course you wouldn't come see me. That's kind of the setup. But the thing is, the setting is really bizarre because this is not a normal movie. It's like 110% this surrealist landscape. Like he lives in this really rundown apartment where there's like people actively like being murdered out front that he has to like run from, and people singing and dancing, and it's just it's a whole nightmare scenario. And the whole movie is him trying to get home to visit his mom, and there's different sequences of surrealist cinema, which is really hard to describe. What I will do is I'll compare it to other movies, something like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Probably the most extreme example is something like Synecdoche, New York, which starred Philip Seymour Hoffman, if you've seen that. But up there on the shelf with Being John Malkovich or I'm thinking of Ending Things, Men from last year, possibly. But it's very experimental. It's very abstract. It's it's something else, and it is 3 hours long. And that's about as good as I can do because it's hard to really describe what is happening in the movie. Zach, what do you think?
I think this movie's really special, actually. We've gotten this. I worry we're getting this reputation, Andy, here on the show that like when a movie is divisive, we're both gonna like it automatically. And I don't think that's true. I think that just happens to be true often. Like that happens to sometimes be true. And in this case, like I think I'm in that same boat. I think I really like this movie. It's so weird. It's so weird. Like I've seen a lot of people saying it's Kaufman-esque. It's like Synecdoche, New York. It's like Alex Garland. Like I've seen really off the wall takes on Beau is Afraid, and like overall, every one of those movies I think I've always really revered. Things like Being John Malkovich. But I've never seen one in a theater. I've never seen it big. I've never seen it like in the way that I think the creator had intended to watch it on the silver screen. It was actually really special going to see this in a theater because I never knew where it was going. God, like Beau is Afraid just takes some of the strangest paths to get where it's headed. And it's so fascinating because bits of it are dreamlike and bits of it are realistic. And it rests in this like valley of absurdism where it never really gives you the luxury of feeling grounded. And it's been, I think, divisive because I've seen people say that's its biggest problem. Like Beau is Afraid never gives you a stable ground to stand on. It never gives you the opportunity to say this is real and this is not. But other people say, well, that's part of what makes it so special, right? Like few films ever go that far. Few films are willing to embrace surrealism to a point of genuine confusion from its audience. And when you watch a lot of movies, we do movie podcasts for a long time, I think in a way like that can be appealing because Beau is Afraid has a pulse in a way that I think a lot of other films don't. I mean, shoot, we walked out of it, we compared it to like Skinamarink, like
Yeah.
Kyle Edward Ball's new horror feature, like something that is so different. I don't know who to recommend it to, but personally, I think I really enjoyed it. Even if it might have been tragically too long. Where do we start talking about this feature without getting into spoilers? What's the best angle?
Well, I think if we focus on the themes, and we can talk about different sequences, it's just man, I think the movie is so much more experiential. It's about how it makes you feel because you're not gonna be able to make sense of like a linear storyline per se. There's just kind of like you know that Beau he's afraid of a lot of things. He's afraid of going home, but he's also afraid of staying where he's at. He's riddled with anxiety, and there's all these sequences that make you feel incredibly anxious. And I think that that's the point, is to get that feeling. Like, there's a part where he gets locked out of his apartment and a whole bunch of people go in, and he's like terrified they're going to destroy everything. And that's kind of what happens. And he's just so helpless. And you empathize with that as the audience member. And I think that's what a lot of this movie's about. It's about conjuring certain feelings, not necessarily telling a story from A to B. Zach, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. Beau is Afraid is like an effort in just like kind of, what's the best way to say this? Beau is full of self-guilt. He's ridden with anxiety, and he feels guilty that his life is going nowhere. It is wasted. Like, nothing is really happening. Like, he's just trapped in this place that he can't get out of, where like everything sucks and nothing's ever getting better, and the world is a horror show directly outside of his apartment, with people like shooting meth and stabbing each other. Like, there's this goofy character called like, what is it, like the Portland Stab Man or something? Like,
Yeah.
this bearded, whatever. Like, and Beau like has to make this journey to go see his mom. That's really it. It's a simple idea, but like along the way, he runs into so much adversity. Like, he meets these goofy characters played by Nathan Lane and Amy Ryan, which are really funny. These like two parents with the son that they lost, and he meets this like weird group of traveling playwrights out in the forest, and a bunch of other individuals. And along the way, I feel like this movie is a bit like what Dickensian Christmas Carol-esque, because it's a journey of like self-discovery, right? Like Ebenezer Scrooge going to sleep at night and then meeting the three spirits and like seeing his life in the past and present and future, and like ultimately getting to the end and waking up Christmas morning and being like, oh my God, like I have this whole new perspective on life. Like, Beau is Afraid is much that way, except it's so dreamlike. Like, you don't get the satisfaction of Scrooge like being a grump and going to bed at night in the first act, and then waking up in the third act and being like, oh, it's Christmas, I've done it. Like, rather, we're Scrooge and we're watching the whole dream. Like, the whole thing is a dream that you're watching as the audience, and you get to the end of it, and the lights come up and you're like, God, what have I just seen? Like, has it changed me, or am I just bitter because it wasn't what I wanted? And I think a lot of people are bitter.
Yeah, I could see how a lot of people would not, especially if if you have not seen like experimental films or things that are very surreal, and this was like your first foray into that, like,
You're gonna hate it.
That would be rough. But there are a lot of sequences that I like. Like, I like the opening. There's basically three sequences, and it's basically, or actually four, but the like the first 45 minutes is one set, and like I really like that opening 45 minutes, and the next sequence when he's kind of stuck at this house with Amy Ryan and Nathan Lane's character. He keeps trying to leave. He's trying to like go, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna take you to the airport this evening." And then this evening he's like, "Oh, we're gonna take you in the morning, and now we're gonna take you tomorrow morning." Like, it's clear he's never gonna leave this place. Like, there's just so much going on. I wanted to talk about the humor. This movie is hilarious in a lot of places, like literally laugh out loud funny. And so many times you just don't expect it. Like, I was laughing constantly throughout, and it's not a comedy by any means. Like, it is definitely a surrealist horror film, but it just has such funny throwaway lines or things you see on screen. Like, one of the opening things, like he's listening to the news, and they're like, Mr. Stabby, the uncircumcised white man, is still on the loose, and it's just like, why is that detail in there?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, lots of like funny cuts to something goofy that you don't expect. There's a great line in the third act when a character references their mother, and the camera like pans over to a portrait. It's like the ugliest person you've ever seen in your whole life, like for no reason, right? Like, just punching down for no good reason. The world that Beau lives in, like, is so cynical and terrible and evil and awful. And he is seemingly like your only real like guiding light of normalcy, even though he is in no way a normal person. Like riddled with anxiety, like constantly like pestered by this feeling of something bad is going to happen in any second. There's nothing I can do. In that way, like I think a lot of sequences in the film like have really great motion. Andy mentioned earlier, like when he loses his keys just in the first act, like the camera's got so much life behind it. Aster, like typically in his films, takes a back seat and really lets the camera just kind of like linger on the moments where it needs to. We get with Florence Pugh's face in Midsommar. You get like what's his name, Alex Wolff in Hereditary, bashing his head against a desk. Like really, really crazy stuff. But in this movie, like it has so much personality. Whip pans, crash zooms, right? You're reminded of like your favorite auteur filmmakers. Like I thought of like Wes Anderson watching this movie. I thought of, I don't know, Terry Gilliam, right? From Monty Python. Like people with like a lot of personality in their editing and their cutting. And like this movie brings that to the table in a way that really elevates the horror to comedy, like in places that you wouldn't expect. Yeah, I was reminded even of like Evil Dead 2. This is something I did not get in Evil Dead Rise. Like this movie is on one hand like horror and also comedy to create this like brilliant, like jet black tragicomedy that is like so funny, but also like surprisingly thoughtful. I think that a lot of people don't like.
Yeah, like it's what I was thinking is that it's almost like that. You hear all the time one for them, one for me. So he's had two very commercially successful horror movies, and now he's doing kind of personal passion project in this. And I think that while it is a very challenging film, he has a lot to say. Like in kind of his past two films, family drama, family dysfunction is a big theme, and we get this as well. And we get glimpses into Beau's life from childhood into adulthood, and he just has this terrible, overbearing, overprotective mother that he's well into middle age, and who's still that way, and who he's still like dealing with childhood trauma, current trauma, tons of anxiety, and the film does a great job of conveying that. It's just in such a bizarre and very kind of long-winded way.
About this movie getting made, like there's no better way to express like how special the time we are in film, cinema, movies than big art house directors getting insane budgets to make whatever they want, right? Like you could think of something relatively mainstream like Damien Chazelle's First Man, a movie that probably would not have been greenlit with the budget it had, even though it's about Neil Armstrong starring Ryan Reynolds, Ryan Gosling. You think of like Robert Eggers' The Northman, like a movie that functionally bombed, like had a huge budget, like big ideas. He wanted to make that movie for years and like was not that big of a hit. You think of Babylon, right? Damien Chazelle, like, well, I just said First Man, but Babylon's a better example from Chazelle's filmography. Like, $65 million movie, like, totally bombs at the box office, even though I thought it was great. And then there's Beau is Afraid. Yeah, Andy's exactly right. Ari Aster has made two fantastic hits. A24 is like, we will give you a blank check. Like, make whatever you want. He says, okay, I'm making this movie that was a short film that he made a while back. I'm adapting it. It's going to be 3 hours long with an insane budget, and people are not going to like it, and I'm making it anyway. And just like those other films, I can't help but feel a little charmed that I got to see this in a theater, because like in any other universe, this would not have happened. Like this would have gone straight to streaming, just like Kaufman's I'm Thinking of Ending Things. It would have been on Netflix. You'd have watched it and thought, boy, that was strange. And then it never would have gone anywhere. Think of like Blonde, right? Like Ana de Armas' Marilyn Monroe movie, 3-hour feature, straight to Netflix. You don't really think about it. Mank, David Fincher's film, like straight to Netflix. You don't really think about it. But here we are with this really odd feature, Beau is Afraid. And I'm glad I got to see it in the theater.
Right. So I just looked up the budget for this. This is $35 million budget. That's huge. In comparison, Hereditary was $10 million. Midsommar was $9 million. So those were made on a third, and they were hits. And this is so expensive, and it's so bizarre. Man, I don't know what to think about that. A24 might just have to take a loss on it.
You got to know, like, whoever was in the boardroom reading this script and, like, approving the budget had to have thought, I don't think so, but it's Ari Aster, right? Like he's turned out 2 banger features. Like who's to say it won't work? I think people had I think the studio had a lot of faith in him to turn this into something. And in that way, like I do think this is a nuanced film from an auteur director. I don't think I will ever see anything like this movie again. And I think Aster is beginning to develop a voice like in his filmography. It's easy to compare him to somebody like Jordan Peele, who's even a little bit more, I think, specific in his films. This is so different from Midsommar and Hereditary. This is like such a step away, but still feels like it comes from somebody who genuinely has a love of the craft. And I think like in that way, even though it is so tonally different, it feels like an Ari Aster movie. And I can't wait to see what he does next.
Yeah, that is one thing to see in a world of franchises and reboots. As much as we go to those and see those, it's nice to see someone making something entirely in left field. I mean, there's shots in here. The opening scene, I don't think it's a spoiler, but it's a birth scene from the perspective of the baby, and it's like it's one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen, and it's so unique because the screen starts completely black, and there's just like muffled sound, and eventually like light bursts open, and like the child is born, and the room's all.
It's not just muffled sounds; it's horrifying screams.
Yeah,
it's the first thing you hear.
Yeah, there's lots of scream, like from the opening scene, like, and you can hear the mother screaming.
Yes.
So from the opening scene, you can see like the relationship that Beau is gonna have with this woman. But like I'd never seen anything like that, and there's a lot of things in this movie that I've never seen. There, like cinematography, shots, and then just concept, and like you love to see an artist really go off the rails, and then maybe in the next one dial it back a little bit, and give us something that is probably a little bit more commercially accessible.
Yeah, one quick mention for the sound design in this movie. Like the screams are unbearable. Like whenever they got somebody screaming in the background, it is bloody murder. Like you are being killed on sight. Like it is brutal how mad the screams are, which like is funny, right? Like that's how tragic comedy works. Like you wouldn't think it'd be funny, but it is. When that uncircumcised stabber shows up, like it's a great laugh because it comes out of nowhere and it's really funny. But I think like you're spot on. Like it's so nice to be able to see something that's just refreshing from a director who is like, I'm not redlining anything. I'm doing this my way or the highway, baby, and it's going to be great. And in that way, like I don't think Aster's all that different from a lot of the directors he aspires to be. Martin Scorsese called Aster one of the most exciting new directors in world cinema. And I think that's accurate. And this is from Scorsese, the guy who like historically has clumsy editing in his features, right? Like, but Scorsese doesn't care. Like, it's not what it's about. Like, it's not about necessarily like the small little instance that the people may not like. It's about the larger story and the message he's trying to convey. And in that way, I think Beau is Afraid is like really special. Even if it's divisive, even if a lot of people didn't like it, like I couldn't find myself on that side of the fence. I ultimately I think I like more than I don't like. Although, quick mention before we get to final recommendations, tragically long runtime. This movie could absolutely lose a half hour easily, probably longer. If there's any one thing I don't like about it, it's just too long.
Yeah, it's a full 3 hours. Act 3 starts after the first 2 hours. I mean, it goes. And it might have been a lot more accessible were it just shorter because, I mean, it's just such a long time to take what it does. But for a lot of it, I mean, it does feel appropriate for that time. Like the first 45-minute sequence is kind of one section, and that like all of that works really well. So I'm sure he was just unable to cut things. He's like, no, it's too important.
I know. Yeah, I read somewhere he's got like a 4-hour cut of it. I'm like, oh God, I don't even think I'd want to watch it. Like, I think there's already plenty here. If anything,
make it a series.
Down, but yeah, right. Yeah, big time. I can't wait to see what he does next. I heard from his director of photography on this, I think, that he's working on like a dark comedy Western next. We'll see if that turns into anything. I really couldn't say. But for what it's worth, I think this movie's something else, man. Andy, you ready for recommendations?
I am.
Andy, would you recommend Beau is Afraid?
So this is a tough one. I didn't particularly like it. I'm going to say probably pass for most people. However, if you are a connoisseur of bold cinema and you're looking for things that are different than what's out there, things that you've never seen before, I would say definitely check it out. If you're curious but you're not certain, wait for streaming. This might go down better in chunks. Like if there's kind of 3-4 big sections, and if you kind of watch it almost like a series, that might be a little bit easier to take. I do want to watch it again, but I definitely want to watch it on my own time at my own pace.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't know who to recommend this to. Like even like real film people that I know, I'm just like, man, you may not go for this. And like that's the thing. I think Aster has said in interviews he knew this movie was not going to do huge numbers, and like that's okay, right? Like I think a lot of directors. That's what Damien Chazelle said about Babylon. He's like, no, I knew at some point like this is too niche. This is not going to hit mainstream audience as well. They're not going to like it. But for what it's worth, like for the Metacritic score, I think, believe it or not, the audience score is higher for this movie than the critic score. Like general audiences seem to like this more than like critics did, and I think people walk in thinking it's going to be something it isn't. I don't know, have some kind of vision in your head of what it's going to be. You got to go into this movie in a vacuum. Like really don't try to compare it to anything else. Just kind of sit back and let the panic attack take you. And you might actually respect yourself more when you come out on the other side of it. And that's Beau is Afraid. What a feature, man. What a week at the movies for two very different horror films. Andy, what are we doing next week?
So we are going to be taking the week off because we've been at the theater a lot. We did 2 theatrical films this week.